This is America. If you want service here, you speak English." Victoria Hayes slammed her palm on the marble counter. The sound cracked through the lobby like a gunshot. Every guest turned. Every staff member froze. The Japanese woman in the navy coat didn't flinch. She stood perfectly still, silent, unreadable, dangerous. That's when the janitor set down his mop. David Miller walked straight into the chaos, bowed slightly, and spoke fluent Japanese with a Kyoto accent that made the billionaire's eyes widen. What happened next would destroy careers, expose ugly truths, and prove that dignity has no uniform. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The mop hit the floor with a wet slap. David Miller had been invisible for 6 years. That was the deal. You push the cart, you clean the glass, you don't make eye contact with guests who spend more on breakfast than you make in a month. The Royal Grand Hotel paid him $17 an hour to disappear. He was good at it. But today, something in the lobby made him stop mid-stroke. A crowd was forming near the reception desk, not the excited kind that gathered for celebrities. This was different. This was tension, coiling tight, ready to snap. He moved closer, pretending to wipe down a brass luggage cart. "Ma'am, for the third time, we do not understand you." The concierge's voice carried that particular brand of politeness that wasn't polite at all. David recognized it immediately. He'd heard it directed at him plenty of times since he traded his professor's blazer for a gray uniform. The woman at the center of the commotion stood perfectly still. Navy blue coat designer, but understated. Hands clasped in front of her. No jewelry except a simple watch. Her posture was impeccable, the kind that comes from decades of boardrooms and business dinners where every gesture is calculated. She hadn't said a word. "Should we call security?" Someone whispered behind the desk. "She's booked in the presidential suite," another voice hissed back. "We can't just—" "She won't respond to anything. English, French, Mandarin. Nothing." David watched the woman's eyes. They weren't confused. They weren't lost. They were scanning the room with the precision of a general assessing a battlefield. He'd seen that look before, in the mirror, after Elena died. It was the look of someone being measured in a currency they never agreed to use. The click of heels announced Victoria Hayes before she appeared. The general manager descended the grand staircase like she was walking onto a Broadway stage, crimson lipstick, power suit, smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Good morning." Victoria placed both hands on the reception counter. "I'm the general manager here. How may we assist you, Miss—" The Japanese woman didn't respond. "Miss—" Victoria's smile tightened. "I'm speaking to you." Nothing. Victoria turned to her staff voice, dropping to a theatrical whisper loud enough for half the lobby to hear. "She's refusing to speak. This is unacceptable." The woman's assistant, a nervous young man in a dark suit, stepped forward. "Ma'am, she's not being difficult. She simply prefers to communicate in her native language for formal matters. If you could arrange for a proper Japanese interpreter—" "We have 3 translators on staff," Victoria interrupted. "None of them seem to meet her standards." "With respect, ma'am, she's one of the most respected executives in— I don't care if she's the emperor's daughter." Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment. "This is a 5-star American hotel. We have protocols, we have standards, and we do not have time for silent treatment and guessing games." David's hand tightened on the mop handle. He knew he should walk away, keep his head down, finish his shift, pick up Sophie from after-school care, heat up leftover pasta, help her with homework. That was the plan. That had been the plan for 6 years. But the woman's assistant was pleading now, his voice cracking. "Please, if you could just—" "She's blocking the check-in line." Victoria waved toward a uniformed guard near the elevator. "Marcus, we may need to escalate this." "Escalate?" The assistant's face went pale. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious about service efficiency." The Japanese woman's hand twitched, just barely, a micro-movement most people would miss. But David caught it. She was controlling herself, holding back something that wanted to explode. Victoria leaned closer, speaking slowly, deliberately, like she was addressing a child or someone mentally impaired. Listen to me very carefully. This is America. If you want to order towels or champagne, you can point like everyone else. But I cannot help someone who refuses to communicate. The lobby had gone silent. Guests pretended not to watch while watching intently. Staff members found sudden urgent tasks that kept them within earshot. The pianist in the corner had stopped playing mid-song, and David Miller, 53 years old, widower father, former linguistics professor at Columbia University, current janitor, making $17 an hour, set down his mop. His feet moved before his brain could stop them. "Excuse me." Every head turned. Victoria blinked, her face cycling through confusion, irritation, and something close to disgust in the span of 2 seconds. "Mr. Miller, this doesn't concern maintenance." "I know." He stepped past her, positioning himself directly in front of the Japanese woman. Up close, he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the almost imperceptible tension in her jaw. She was exhausted. Not from travel, from fighting. David bowed. Not a casual nod, but a proper bow, 15 degrees, held for exactly 2 seconds. The kind taught in formal settings. The kind that said, "I see you. I respect you. I understand." Then he spoke. "Shitsure shimasu. Ocha wa ikaga desu ka? Tanaka-sama moto, Shizuka Nabasho de." "Would you care for some tea, Ms. Tanaka?" "Somewhere quieter." The woman's eyes widened. Not dramatically, she was too controlled for that. But the shift was unmistakable. Like watching a door crack open after being locked for years. She responded in Japanese, her voice low and melodic. "You speak with a Kyoto accent." "I lived there for 7 years," David replied in the same language. "I apologize if it's rusty." "It's not rust." Her expression softened just barely, just enough. "It's memory." Victoria's voice cut through like a knife. "What is happening right now?" The assistant Daniel, his name tag read, was staring at David with his mouth literally hanging open. He's speaking with her, perfectly, fluent Japanese, with Kyoto intonation. "That's impossible. He's a janitor." David didn't turn around. He kept his focus on the woman waiting. She studied him for a long moment. Then, in careful English touched with a slight accent, "I will accept your offer, Mr. Miller, David Miller." "Mr. Miller." She inclined her head slightly. "Tea sounds welcome." And just like that, the most powerful person in that lobby, a woman worth more than the hotel itself, walked away from the marble counter and followed a janitor toward the quiet lounge. Behind them, the silence stretched like a held breath. Then the whispers started. The tea lounge was empty this time of morning. David had chosen it deliberately, tucked away from the main lobby, separated by frosted glass panels that muffled sound without blocking light entirely. 2 leather armchairs faced each other across a low mahogany table. He pulled out a chair for her. She accepted with a small nod. "I should warn you," David said, settling into the opposite seat. "The tea here is adequate at best. They serve it in bags." The corner of her mouth twitched. "I've survived worse." "I don't doubt it." A server appeared, young, nervous, clearly informed by the staff grapevine that something unusual was happening. David ordered in English, keeping it simple. "Green tea, 2 cups. No sugar." When they were alone again, the woman spoke. "My name is Yuki Nakamura." David's hand stilled on the armrest. He knew that name. Anyone who followed international business knew that name. Nakamura Technologies, Sustainable Energy Solutions. One of the top 5 female-led tech companies in Asia. "I know who you are, Ms. Nakamura. And yet you bowed like I was simply a tired traveler. Aren't you?" She considered this. "Yes, I suppose I am." The tea arrived. David poured for both of them, his movements, unhurried, deliberate. It wasn't the formal tea ceremony, he didn't have the proper implements for that, but the rhythm was similar. Respect woven into every gesture. Yuki watched him. You learned this formally. Kyoto University, 7 years as a cultural linguistics lecturer. He slid her cup across the table. I specialized in communication patterns, the things people say without speaking. And now you clean floors. It wasn't a question, and there was no judgment in her voice, just observation. Now I clean floors, David confirmed. Why? He lifted his own cup, let the steam warm his face. Because my wife died, and my daughter needed a father who was present, not one who was chasing tenure while she cried herself to sleep. Yuki's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or respect. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. He took a sip. It was 7 years ago. Sophie was 3. She's 10 now. Brilliant, stubborn, currently obsessed with a video game about farming that I don't understand at all. That earned him a small smile. Children have a way of humbling us. That's one way to put it. They drank in silence for a moment. Comfortable silence, the kind David hadn't experienced with another adult in years. Most people couldn't tolerate quiet. They rushed to fill it with noise, with opinions, with the desperate need to be heard. This woman understood that silence had its own language. Finally, Yuki set down her cup. You want to know why I stopped speaking English? Only if you want to tell me. I don't. She paused. But I will. David waited. 15 years ago, I came to America for the first time. I was 22, just graduated from Waseda University, recruited by a Silicon Valley startup that wanted to expand into Asian markets. I was young, naive. I believed that competence would speak for itself. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. There was a meeting. Investors, executives, the people who decided whether my project would receive funding. I presented for 45 minutes, flawless data, clear projections, everything they asked for. What happened? After I left the room, one of them said loudly enough for me to hear through the door, "She's impressive for someone who needs subtitles." The others laughed. David's hand tightened on his cup. I went home that night and practiced my English for 6 hours. I hired a dialect coach. I eliminated every trace of accent I could. And when I went back for the next meeting, I spoke perfect American English. Her eyes met his. They funded the project. But it didn't matter. No, it didn't, because I'd already heard the truth. My words were never the problem. My face was. My name was. The assumptions they made before I ever opened my mouth, those were the problem. She took another sip of tea, her composure perfectly intact. But David could see the old wound beneath it still raw after all these years. So I stopped. Stopped speaking English in negotiations, not because I can't, I'm fluent in 4 languages, but because I wanted to see who would try to understand me even when it wasn't easy. A filter for authenticity. David nodded slowly. And how many pass? Almost none. Her gaze flickered toward the lobby beyond the frosted glass. Your hotel's general manager certainly didn't. She's not my anything. I push a mop. You do more than that. Before David could respond, the lounge door swung open. Victoria Hayes stood in the entrance, her face a mask of controlled fury. Mr. Miller, a word. David rose slowly. I'm with a guest. The guest can wait. This is an employment matter. Yuki stood as well. If you wish to speak with Mr. Miller, you may do so after our conversation is complete. Victoria's smile turned glacial. With respect, Ms. Nakamura, internal staffing matters are not. With respect, Ms. Hayes. Yuki's voice didn't rise, but it hardened. You spent 15 minutes treating me like an inconvenience, a problem to be managed, a foreigner who couldn't understand simple English. Mr. Miller spent 30 seconds treating me like a human being. You will wait." The two women stared at each other. David had seen boardroom showdowns before. He'd witnessed academic politics at their most vicious. But this was something else entirely. Two forces of nature colliding in a hotel tea lounge over a janitor who just wanted to finish his shift and go home. Victoria's jaw worked. "We will discuss this later, Mr. Miller. Count on it." She turned and walked away, her heels striking the marble floor like hammer blows. When the door closed behind her, Yuki exhaled slowly. "You're going to have trouble." "I've had trouble before." "Not like this." She's humiliated. People like her don't forgive that. David gathered the teacups, stacking them neatly on the tray. "People like her have been humiliating people like me for 6 years. I've cleaned up their messes literally. I've listened to them talk about janitors like we're furniture with pulse rates. This is the first time I've spoken back." "Why now? Why me?" He paused, holding the tray. The question deserved an honest answer. "Because of the way they looked at you. Like you were the problem. Like your silence meant ignorance or arrogance or something to be fixed." He met her eyes. "I've seen that look before. In the mirror, mostly. After I lost everything that used to make people respect me." Yuki was quiet for a long moment. "You didn't lose everything, Mr. Miller." "Didn't I? You still have your daughter. You still have your dignity. And clearly," a trace of warmth entered her voice, "you still have your Japanese." That surprised a laugh out of him. "Fair point." She reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a business card, simple, elegant, her name embossed in silver. "I'm staying in the presidential suite for 4 days. I have meetings that will likely bore me to tears. But I would like to have tea again if you're willing, with someone who speaks my language." David accepted the card. It felt heavier than paper should. "I finish at 6 most days. Sophie has dance class on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so those evenings are—" "Sophie. My daughter." Something flickered across Yuki's face there, and gone too fast to identify. "How old did you say she was?" 10. Going on 40 if you ask her teachers." Yuki nodded slowly. 10. Yes. She seemed to be working through something internally. "Mr. Miller, may I ask your wife? What was her name?" The question caught him off guard. Most people avoided the topic entirely as if widowhood was contagious. "Elena. Elena Miller." "Why?" Yuki's expression shifted, something David couldn't quite read. "No reason. I believe in knowing the names of those who shape us, even in their absence." Before he could respond, his radio crackled. "Miller, this is maintenance supervisor. Report to HR immediately. Repeat immediately." David looked at the radio, then at Yuki. "You should go," she said. "But Mr. Miller." "Yes? Whatever they tell you in that room, remember who you were before you put on that uniform, and remember who you still are." She picked up her coat, folding it precisely over her arm. "Titles are borrowed, dignity is owned." The HR office was on the 4th floor, tucked away from guest areas behind a door marked Staff Only. David had been here exactly twice in 6 years, once during his initial hiring, and once when a guest accused him of stealing a watch that turned out to be in her husband's mistress's purse. He knocked. "Enter." The office was small, functional, deliberately unwelcoming. A desk, 2 chairs, a computer, and a framed poster that said, "Excellence is not an act, but a habit." Patricia Simmons, head of human resources, sat behind the desk with a folder open in front of her. Victoria Hayes stood by the window, arms crossed. "Sit down, Mr. Miller." David sat. Patricia didn't look up from the folder. "You've been employed with us for 6 years. Good record. No complaints. Reliable." "Thank you." That wasn't a compliment. It was context. She finally met his eyes. "What happened this morning was a serious breach of protocol. What happened this morning was me helping a guest. That's not your job." Victoria's voice cut in. "Your job is sanitation. Your job is keeping this hotel clean. Your job is not intervening in guest relations matters that you are neither trained nor authorized to handle." David kept his voice even. The guest was being treated disrespectfully. I had the language skills to assist. I assisted. "You embarrassed this hotel." "I embarrassed you. There's a difference." Victoria's face flushed. "Watch your tone." Patricia raised a hand. "Let's stay professional." She pulled a sheet of paper from the folder. "Mr. Miller, we have a statement here from 3 staff members who witnessed the incident. They describe you as overstepping boundaries, inserting yourself into a management situation, and causing unnecessary disruption. Those staff members were standing 5 feet away while their manager told an international businesswoman to point like everyone else if she wanted service. Is there a statement about that?" Silence. Victoria straightened. "I was attempting to resolve a complicated situation." "You were attempting to humiliate someone for not performing on your terms. That's enough." Patricia's voice sharpened. "Mr. Miller, you are being placed on administrative leave pending a formal review. You will surrender your badge and uniform. You will not enter hotel premises until further notice." David felt the words land like physical blows. Administrative leave. Surrender your badge. The polite vocabulary of professional destruction. For what cause? Insubordination. Deviation from assigned duties. Potential harassment of a guest. Harassment. David actually laughed. "She thanked me. She gave me her business card. She asked me to have tea with her again." "We have only your word for that." "Then ask her." Patricia and Victoria exchanged glances. "Ms. Nakamura's schedule is extremely busy," Victoria said smoothly. "We wouldn't want to disturb her with internal personnel matters." "You mean you don't want her to tell you that you're wrong?" Victoria stepped forward, dropping any pretense of professionalism. "Listen to me very carefully, Mr. Miller. You are a janitor. You clean toilets and mop floors and empty trash cans. That is the sum total of your value to this organization. Whatever you used to be, whatever languages you speak, whatever degrees collect dust in your apartment, none of that matters here. You had a lane. You should have stayed in it." David stood slowly. He was taller than both women. He'd forgotten that somehow. 6 years of hunching over mop buckets, of making himself smaller, of disappearing into the background, he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand at his full height. "Ms. Hayes, I've met a lot of people like you in my life. In universities, in corporations, in every place where power gets confused with worth. You think titles make you important. You think the corner office and the business card and the ability to fire people makes you matter." He reached up and unclipped his badge, set it on the desk. "But I've learned something in the last 7 years, something you might never understand." He looked directly into her eyes. "The most important job I've ever had is making sure my daughter knows she's loved. Everything else, the degrees, the publications, the status, it all burned down. And you know what? I'm still standing. I'm still her father. I still have something that matters." He stepped toward the door, then paused. "That woman you treated like an inconvenience. She runs a company worth more than this hotel chain combined. But that's not why she deserves respect. She deserves respect because she's a human being who was exhausted and far from home, and asking, not demanding, asking for basic dignity." He opened the door. "You might want to think about that before your next performance review." The walk to the employee locker room felt longer than usual. David's hands were steady as he changed out of his uniform, hanging the gray shirt and pants neatly in the locker that still had his name on it. Miller D. Like a ghost that hadn't gotten the message yet. His phone buzzed. Text from Sophie's school. "Reminder. Parent-teacher conference tomorrow 4 p.m. Please confirm attendance." He typed back a reply. Confirmed. Then he stared at the screen for a long moment. What was he going to tell her? How did you explain to a 10-year-old that Daddy lost his job because he did the right thing? That the world punished people for kindness? That sometimes the bad guys won and the bills still needed to be paid? He couldn't. He wouldn't have to lie either. Sophie was too smart for that. She'd see through any attempt at sugarcoating within seconds. But maybe there was a third option. Maybe he could tell her the truth, the whole truth. That her father had spent 6 years being invisible, and today, for the first time since her mother died, he'd remembered what it felt like to be seen, to matter, to stand up for something even when it cost him. Maybe that was the lesson worth teaching. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Probably a scam call or a bill collector, or the text message read, "Mr. Miller. This is Daniel Ms. Nakamura's assistant. She requests your presence in the presidential suite at your earliest convenience. She says to tell you the tea here is surprisingly adequate." David read it twice. Then, against every instinct telling him to go home and lick his wounds, he typed back, "On my way." The presidential suite occupied the entire top floor of the Royal Grand Hotel. David had cleaned it twice in 6 years, both times during complete renovations when the furniture was covered in plastic and the windows were being replaced. He'd never seen it occupied. The door opened before he could knock. Daniel stood there, still looking shell-shocked from the morning's events. "Mr. Miller, please come in. She's on the terrace." The suite was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows, original artwork on the walls, a living room larger than David's entire apartment. But he didn't stop to gawk. He crossed through the space to the French doors that opened onto a private terrace overlooking the city. Yuki Nakamura sat in a wicker chair, a tablet in her lap, watching the sunset paint the skyline gold and amber. "Mr. Miller." She gestured to the chair beside her. "Sit." He sat. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city hummed far below traffic sirens, the eternal rhythm of urban life. A helicopter traced a line across the distant sky. Finally, Yuki said, "They fired you." "Administrative leave. It sounds nicer." "It's the same thing with better vocabulary." "Yes." She set aside her tablet. "I made some inquiries this afternoon. About you." David tensed. Former professor of cultural linguistics at Columbia University. Published extensively on East Asian communication patterns. Left academia 7 years ago following your wife's death. Since then, janitor at the Royal Grand Hotel. Single father to a daughter named Sophie, aged 10. She paused. "Did I miss anything?" "No." "I don't like mysteries, Mr. Miller. In my world, information is currency, so I gathered some." Her eyes met his. "What I couldn't find was why a man with your qualifications would spend 6 years mopping floors." David looked out at the city. You ever stand at the edge of a cliff and feel the wind trying to push you over? Metaphorically. Both. Yuki waited. After Elena died, everything fell apart. Not slowly, instantly. One day, I had a life, a career, a partner, a plan. The next day, I was standing in a hospital hallway, being told that the brain aneurysm was massive, that she'd felt no pain, that these things happen sometimes, and there's no one to blame. His voice didn't waver. He'd told this story enough times that the words had worn smooth like river stones. Sophie was 3. She didn't understand why Mommy wasn't coming home. She'd stand by the window every night waiting, for weeks, months. She developed what the doctors called selective mutism, stopped talking almost entirely for nearly 2 years. Yuki's expression shifted. Something flickered there. Recognition, pain, understanding. I couldn't function, couldn't teach, couldn't stand in front of a classroom and talk about communication patterns when my own daughter had stopped speaking. I took leave, then more leave. Then the university made it clear that my position was no longer sustainable. So you walked away. I ran away. Let's be honest about it. David finally looked at her. The janitorial job was supposed to be temporary, just something to pay the bills while I figured out my next move. But weeks became months, became years, and somewhere along the line, I realized something. What? I didn't want to go back. The academic world, the publish or perish pressure, the conferences and committees and constant performance. It all felt hollow. Meaningless. What mattered was being home when Sophie got out of school, making dinner, helping with homework, being present. He smiled faintly. It turns out mopping floors pays enough to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. And nobody expects a janitor to be brilliant or ambitious or impressive. You just have to show up and do the work. There's something peaceful about that. Yuki was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your daughter, Sophie. You said she had selective mutism." Past tense. She's talking again. Has been for years. Still quiet, she'll never be the loudest voice in any room, but she communicates. She's actually quite funny once you get to know her. I'm glad. Something in her tone made David look more closely. Ms. Nakamura, why did you really ask me here? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her pocket and withdrew a small object, a silver locket tarnished with age on a delicate chain. Do you recognize this? David frowned. The locket was familiar somehow. The design cherry blossoms etched into the metal. Where had he seen his heart stopped? That's impossible. Is it? Elena had a locket just like that. She wore it every day. After she died, Sophie. He trailed off the memory, hitting him like a physical blow. Sophie has the other half. Elena gave it to her before at the hospital. She said someday someone would return the other piece. Yuki opened the locket. Inside was a small photograph. Faded, creased from years of handling. A young woman with kind eyes and a warm smile standing in front of a chalkboard. David couldn't breathe. Where did you get that? From my teacher. Yuki's voice was soft. 23 years ago, when I first came to America, I was 19, terrified, barely spoke any English. I enrolled in a community center class on the Lower East Side, taught by a woman who never made me feel stupid for struggling. She held out the locket. Her name was Elena. She wore cherry blossom earrings. She always brought miso soup in a thermos. And on the last day of class, she gave me this locket and said, "Your voice matters even when it's quiet." David took the locket with trembling hands. Elena, his Elena, teaching English to immigrants 23 years ago, before they'd even met. Changing lives he'd never known about. I tried to find her afterward, Yuki continued, to thank her. But she'd left the community center, moved on. I never got the chance. She looked at David, and for the first time her composure cracked. Just slightly, just enough to show the human being beneath the billionaire. When you told me your wife's name this morning, I wasn't certain. There must be thousands of Elenas in New York. But I made some calls, checked some records. Her voice broke. It was her. Your wife was the woman who taught me that my voice mattered, and I never got to thank her. The locket felt warm in David's palm. Elena's smile looked up at him from the photograph, younger than he'd ever known her, but unmistakably her. She would have been proud, he said quietly, of what you've become. Would she? Elena believed everyone had a voice worth hearing. She used to say that the quietest people often had the most important things to say. He closed the locket carefully. She would have loved knowing that one of her students remembered her this way. Yuki wiped her eyes quickly, efficiently, a woman who'd trained herself not to show weakness. Keep it. What? The locket. It should be with her family, with Sophie. She paused. With you. David shook his head. I can't accept this. It's clearly important to you. It is. That's why I want you to have it. She straightened in her chair, composure returning. Mr. Miller, I came to New York for business meetings that suddenly seem very unimportant. I came prepared to negotiate deals with people who see me as a number on a spreadsheet. She looked at him directly. Instead, I found a janitor who speaks my language, who treated me with dignity when no one else would, who turns out to be connected to the one person who taught me that dignity mattered in the first place. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I don't believe in coincidences, Mr. Miller. I believe in moments that matter. This is one of them. David held the locket, feeling the weight of 23 years of connection he'd never known existed. Elena's legacy still rippling outward, still changing lives, still mattering. "What happens now?" he asked. Yuki stood and walked to the terrace railing, looking out at the city lights beginning to flicker on against the darkening sky. Now I think we have more to discuss, about dignity, about second chances, about voices that matter even when they're quiet. She turned back to him. "And I think you should bring Sophie tomorrow. I'd very much like to meet the daughter of the woman who changed my life." David looked at the locket one more time. Then he slipped it into his pocket next to his heart and nodded. She'd like that. She doesn't know it yet, but she'd like that very much. The apartment was quiet when David unlocked the door. Too quiet. "Sophie." No answer. His heart rate spiked for half a second before he heard the soft shuffle of socked feet on hardwood. She appeared in the hallway, still in her school clothes, holding her worn stuffed rabbit by one ear. "You're early," she said. "I know. You never come home early." David set his keys on the counter and crouched down to her level. Sophie was small for her age, all sharp elbows and serious eyes. She had Elena's cheekbones. Elena's way of tilting her head when she was thinking hard about something. "Something happened at work today," he said. "Bad something or good something. I'm not sure yet." Sophie considered this. "Did you get fired?" David blinked. "How did you—" "Mrs. Patterson got fired last month. She came home early, too. Tommy said she cried for 3 days and then got a job at Target." Sophie's expression didn't change. "Are you going to work at Target?" Despite everything, David laughed. "I don't think so, sweetheart." "Good. Their uniforms are red. You look weird in red." He pulled her into a hug. She let him, which was rare these days. 10 years old meant she was starting to pull away to build the walls that would eventually make her a teenager, then an adult, then someone who didn't need her father quite so much. "I met someone today," David said into her hair. "Someone who knew Mommy a long time ago." Sophie went still. She didn't pull back, didn't look up, just froze like a deer that had heard a branch snap. "Knew her how?" "Mommy was her teacher, before I even met Mommy, before you were born." Now Sophie did pull back. Her eyes were wide, searching his face for something, truth maybe, or permission to feel whatever she was feeling. She remembered Mommy. She never forgot her. Sophie's lower lip trembled. Just once, just slightly. Then she straightened her spine and lifted her chin, and David saw Elena so clearly it physically hurt. "I want to meet her." "I thought you might say that." The next morning, David woke to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. He scrolled through them with growing unease. Former colleagues he hadn't spoken to in years. A cousin in Ohio. 2 reporters from outlets he'd never heard of. And Marcus, the night concierge, who had sent the same message 4 times. "Call me now." David called. "Where have you been?" Marcus's voice was tight. "Have you seen the internet?" "I was sleeping. What's happening?" "You're happening, man. Someone filmed the whole thing yesterday. The lobby, the bow, the Japanese. It's everywhere." David's stomach dropped. Define everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, CNN picked it up an hour ago. The hashtag is trending. The Janitor Who Listened. "That's not I didn't want—" "I know you didn't. But it's out there now. And David—" Marcus paused. "Victoria is losing her mind. Whatever you did, you need to watch your back." David hung up and opened Twitter. The video was grainy, clearly shot on a phone from across the lobby, but the audio was surprisingly clear. Victoria's voice cut through like a knife. "This is America. If you want service here, you speak English." And then David stepping forward, bowing, speaking Japanese with quiet confidence. The comments numbered in the thousands. This man restored my faith in humanity. Why isn't he running the hotel? That manager needs to be fired immediately. Someone find this janitor. He deserves better. David closed the app. His hands were shaking. "Dad?" Sophie stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas. "Your phone is making a lot of noise." "I know, sweetheart." "Is it the bad something?" David looked at his daughter. 10 years old, too smart for her own good. About to walk into a storm she didn't deserve. "Come here," he said. "We need to talk." He told her everything. The woman in the lobby, the Japanese, the tea. Victoria Hayes and her fury. The video that was now spreading across the internet like wildfire. Sophie listened without interrupting, her rabbit clutched tight against her chest. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "So you helped someone?" she finally said. "Yes." "And now you're in trouble for helping someone." "It's complicated." "No, it isn't." Sophie's voice was firm. "People should help people. That's what Mommy always said. That's why she taught English to people who didn't know it. Because helping is important." David's throat tightened. "You remember that?" "I remember everything about Mommy." She said it simply without drama, but the words landed like stones in still water. "Okay," David said. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to get dressed, we're going to have breakfast, and then we're going to the hotel to meet the woman who knew Mommy." "What about the trouble? Let me worry about that." Sophie shook her head. "No, we'll worry about it together. That's what we do." And for the first time in 7 years, David felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone. The hotel lobby was chaos. David saw it the moment they walked through the doors. Guests clustered in groups, phones out, clearly discussing the viral video. Staff members whispered behind the reception desk, falling silent when they spotted him. A security guard David didn't recognize stood near the elevator watching. Sophie's hand tightened in his. "Lots of people staring," she murmured. "Don't worry about them." "I'm not worried. I just don't like it." "That's fair." They made it halfway across the lobby before Victoria Hayes materialized, blocking their path like a designer-clad wall. "Mr. Miller." Her voice was ice. "You were instructed not to enter hotel premises." "I'm here as a guest." "You're here as a trespasser." "I'm here at the invitation of a guest staying in your presidential suite. I believe that supersedes whatever instructions you think you gave me." Victoria's eyes flickered to Sophie. Something shifted in her expression, calculation maybe, or the realization that causing a scene in front of a child would not play well on camera. "Who is this?" "My daughter." "Sophie, say hello to Ms. Hayes." Sophie looked up at Victoria with those serious, assessing eyes. "Hello. My dad says you were mean to someone who was tired and far from home. That's not very nice." Victoria's smile could have frozen nitrogen. Children should be seen and not heard. That's what bullies say when they don't like what they're hearing. David bit back a laugh. Victoria's face went red, then white, then settled into something that looked like controlled murder. "This isn't over, Mr. Miller." "I didn't think it was." She turned and walked away, her heels striking the marble floor like machine gun fire. Sophie watched her go. "I don't like her." "You're a good judge of character." "I know." The elevator to the presidential suite required a special key card. David didn't have one, but Daniel was waiting for them in the lobby, looking nervous and slightly awed. "Mr. Miller, Ms. Nakamura is expecting you." He glanced at Sophie. "Both of you." In the elevator, Sophie pressed herself against David's side. "What if she doesn't like me?" "She'll like you." "How do you know?" "Because she liked your mom, and you're exactly like her." Sophie didn't respond, but her grip on his hand loosened slightly. The suite doors opened, and Yuki Nakamura stood waiting. She was dressed simply today, dark slacks, a cream-colored blouse, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail. No jewelry except the watch David had noticed yesterday. She looked less like a billionaire and more like someone's elegant grandmother. Her eyes went immediately to Sophie. "You must be Sophie." Sophie nodded, suddenly shy. Yuki crouched down, bringing herself to Sophie's level. Your father told me about you. He said you're brilliant and stubborn. Is that true? I'm good at math, Sophie said carefully. And I don't give up when things are hard. Those are excellent qualities. Yuki smiled, and it transformed her face. I have something that belongs to you. Would you like to see it? Sophie looked up at David, uncertain. He nodded. Yuki reached into her pocket and withdrew the silver locket. She held it out on her palm, letting Sophie see the cherry blossoms etched into the metal. Sophie's breath caught. That looks like yours? Yes. Yuki's voice was gentle. Your mother gave me this locket 23 years ago. She was my teacher. She taught me English when I first came to America, when I was scared and alone and couldn't speak to anyone. Sophie's hands trembled as she reached up and touched the locket around her own neck, the one she'd worn every day since Elena's death. Mommy said someone would come back with the other half. I know. I'm sorry it took me so long. Sophie's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, silent and unchecked. She didn't sob, didn't wail. She cried the way David remembered Elena crying, with quiet dignity. Yuki opened her arms. Sophie walked into them without hesitation. David watched his daughter embrace a billionaire she'd met 30 seconds ago, crying into her silk blouse, and felt something shift inside his chest. A door opening, a weight lifting. Elena's legacy still reaching out, still healing, still mattering. They stayed in the suite for hours. Yuki ordered room service tea for the adults, hot chocolate for Sophie. They sat together on the massive leather sofa, and Yuki told stories about Elena that David had never heard. The way she'd brought homemade onigiri to class, even though none of her students were Japanese. The time she'd stood up to a landlord who was harassing an immigrant family. Her habit of staying late to help struggling students, never accepting payment, never keeping track of the extra hours. Sophie drank it in like water in a desert. She sounds exactly like I remember, Sophie said finally. Warm, like sunshine but not too hot. That's exactly right, Yuki said. Warm like sunshine but not too hot. David's phone buzzed, then buzzed again, then started buzzing continuously. I should probably check that. The messages were coming faster now. The video had hit 3 million views. Major news outlets were picking up the story. Someone had identified Yuki Nakamura as the woman in the video, and the narrative was shifting from janitor helps guest to billionaire CEO treated like a criminal by hotel manager. Ms. Nakamura, David said slowly. I think you should see this. She took his phone, scrolled through the notifications. Her expression didn't change, but something hardened behind her eyes. They found out who I am. Yes. And now they're turning this into a story about power. Is that a problem? Yuki set down the phone. It depends on what kind of story you want to tell. Daniel knocked and entered, his face pale. Ms. Nakamura, there are reporters in the lobby. A lot of them. They're asking for statements. From the hotel. From you. And from Mr. Miller. Yuki looked at David. What do you want to do? What do you mean? This is your story as much as mine. More, really. You're the one who stepped forward. You're the one who risked your job. You're the one who's about to become very, very public. She leaned forward. So I'm asking, what do you want to do? David thought about Victoria Hayes and her ice-cold smile. About the HR meeting and the badge he'd surrendered. About 6 years of invisibility, of keeping his head down, of disappearing. He thought about Elena, who never stayed silent when someone needed help. He thought about Sophie sitting across from him with tears still drying on her cheeks, holding a locket that connected her to a legacy she'd never known existed. I want to tell the truth, David said. Yuki nodded. Then that's what we'll do. The hotel's conference room had been transformed into a makeshift press center. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled the seats. Hotel executives clustered in the corners, looking variously worried, furious, and calculating. Victoria Hayes stood near the door, arms crossed, face unreadable. David walked in with Sophie on one side and Yuki on the other. He felt the room's attention shift to them like a physical force. "Thank you for coming." Yuki began stepping up to the podium. "I know you have questions. I'll answer what I can." A reporter shouted immediately, "Ms. Nakamura, is it true you refuse to speak English as a protest against American businesses?" "No. I chose to communicate in my native language because I wanted to see who would try to understand me rather than demand I perform for their comfort." "Mr. Miller, can you confirm you've been terminated from your position?" David stepped forward. "I've been placed on administrative leave. Whether that becomes termination remains to be seen." "What made you intervene in the situation?" David paused. He looked at the cameras, at the reporters, at the phones, recording every word. Then he looked at Sophie standing slightly behind him, her hand wrapped around his. "I saw a woman being dismissed, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she wasn't speaking the language others expected. I've felt that dismissal before. Most people have." He took a breath. "I didn't do anything heroic. I just treated another person like a human being. That shouldn't be news." The room erupted. Questions flew like shrapnel. David answered. Some deflected, others tried to stay focused on what mattered. Then Victoria Hayes stepped forward. "If I may," she said, smooth as silk, "I'd like to address some misconceptions about yesterday's incident." The room quieted. The Royal Grand Hotel prides itself on exceptional guest service. When Ms. Nakamura arrived, our staff attempted every available translation service. Mr. Miller's intervention, while well-intentioned, violated established protocols and created unnecessary confusion. She smiled. "We're grateful the situation was resolved peacefully, and we look forward to welcoming Ms. Nakamura back as our guest." David watched her performance with something like amazement. She was rewriting history in real time, turning herself from villain to victim to gracious host in the span of 30 seconds. But she'd forgotten something. "Ms. Hayes." Yuki's voice cut through the murmur of reporters. "Yes. You said your staff attempted every available translation service." "That's correct." "Then perhaps you can explain this." Yuki nodded to Daniel, who pressed a button on his tablet. Victoria's voice filled the room clear as crystal recorded on someone's phone. "This is America. If you want service here, you speak English. We don't have time for guessing games and silent treatment." The room went dead silent. Victoria's face drained of color. "That recording was taken without consent." "In a public lobby of your own hotel," Yuki interrupted. "By one of your own guests. Shall I play the rest? The part where you suggested I point like everyone else, if I wanted service? Or perhaps the part where you threatened to call security on a woman whose only crime was exhaustion?" Victoria's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. "I came to this city to evaluate business partnerships," Yuki continued. "I came prepared to invest significantly in American hospitality infrastructure, but I find myself reconsidering." She turned to face the cameras directly. "Not because of one manager's prejudice. Prejudice exists everywhere, and I'm not naive enough to think it can be eliminated by press conferences. But because of how that prejudice was handled afterward. Because the man who showed me basic human dignity was punished while the woman who denied it was promoted to manage the response." She let that land. "I will be making recommendations to the Royal Grand Hotel's Board of Directors. What they do with those recommendations is their choice." She paused. "But I want to be very clear about something." Her eyes found David. "The most valuable person I met in this hotel was not wearing a designer suit. He wasn't carrying a business card or quoting revenue projections. He was holding a mop. And he reminded me of something I'd forgotten in all my years of boardrooms and negotiations." She smiled just slightly. "Dignity doesn't need a title. It just needs to be recognized." The applause started slowly. One person, then another, then a wave that rolled through the conference room like thunder. Sophie squeezed David's hand. "Dad, she whispered. People are clapping for you. I know, sweetheart. How does it feel? David looked at his daughter, at Yuki Nakamura, standing at the podium with tears she refused to shed. At Victoria Hayes, frozen in the corner, watching her career crumble in real time. Complicated, he said honestly. It feels complicated. The aftermath was chaos. Reporters surrounded David the moment the press conference ended. He gave short answers, deflected personal questions, kept Sophie close. Yuki's security team eventually created a path for them to the elevators. In the suite away from the cameras and questions, Sophie collapsed on the sofa. That was a lot of people, she said. Yes, it was. They kept asking about you, like you were famous. I'm not famous, I'm just temporarily interesting. Sophie considered this. What happens when you stop being interesting? Then we go back to normal. Pasta dinners, homework, you beating me at video games. You're really bad at video games. I'm aware. Yuki joined them, settling into an armchair with a sigh. The board has already been in contact. Victoria Hayes will be placed on administrative leave effective immediately. Administrative leave. David shook his head. Sounds familiar. It won't end the same way. The recording made sure of that. Yuki looked at him. You, on the other hand, have some decisions to make. What kind of decisions? I wasn't exaggerating about the investment opportunities. I have significant resources, and I'm looking for partners who understand what I'm trying to build. She leaned forward. Not partners who speak the right language, partners who listen the right way. David frowned. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a conversation about what you want your life to look like, about whether you're ready to stop being invisible. Her eyes softened. About whether Elena's husband wants to keep mopping floors or start changing rooms. Sophie sat up straight. Dad could change rooms. He's good at changing things. Sophie, you changed me. She continued, her voice steady. When Mommy died and I stopped talking, everyone said I might never talk again. The doctors said it. The teachers said it. But you didn't listen to them. You just kept talking to me every day, even when I didn't answer. You read me stories and asked me questions and made me feel like my voice mattered, even when I couldn't find it. She looked at him with Elena's eyes. You did that. Not a doctor, not a teacher. You. David's throat closed. So maybe, Sophie said, it's time you remember that your voice matters too. The silence stretched between them. Then Yuki spoke very softly. She really is exactly like Elena. I know. David managed. I know she is. His phone buzzed again. Another wave of messages, another cascade of notifications. The world was calling, demanding attention, demanding answers, demanding pieces of a story that hadn't finished yet. David looked at the phone, at Yuki, at his daughter. Then he turned the phone off and set it on the table. Okay, he said. Let's have that conversation. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Yuki spoke about her company, about the foundation she'd built from nothing, about the gap she saw between corporate success and human connection. She talked about diversity initiatives that failed because they were designed by people who'd never felt excluded. About communication training programs led by consultants who'd never been misunderstood. I don't need another executive, she said. I have plenty of those. What I need is someone who understands what it feels like to be invisible. Someone who can teach that understanding to others. David listened, asked questions, pushed back when something didn't make sense. Sophie fell asleep on the sofa around hour 2, curled up with her rabbit, the silver locket clutched in her hand. She's remarkable, Yuki said quietly, watching her. The way she defended you at that press conference. The way she spoke about your voice mattering. She's been through a lot. So have you. David shrugged. I'm an adult. I signed up for this. She didn't. No one signs up for grief, Mr. Miller. It just arrives. He looked at her, really looked, Behind the composure and the business acumen and the carefully constructed public persona, there was something else, something wounded. "You lost someone too," he said. It wasn't a question. Yuki's hand stilled on her teacup. "What makes you say that? The way you talk about Elena. The way you held Sophie when she cried. That's not corporate empathy. That's recognition." For a long moment she didn't respond. Then she said, "My father." David waited. "He died when I was 21. Cancer. By the time they found it, there was nothing to be done." Her voice stayed steady, but her knuckles whitened around the cup. "The day before he passed, he held my hand and said, 'Don't fear being misunderstood. Fear becoming someone easy to understand.'" That's beautiful. It's also lonely. She set down the cup. "I've spent my entire career being misunderstood, being underestimated, being dismissed. And somewhere along the way, I started to believe that was strength. That isolation was the price of success." "Is it?" "I thought so, until yesterday." She looked at him. "Until a janitor bowed to me in a hotel lobby and reminded me what it felt like to be seen." David didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. The silence stretched between them, comfortable and heavy at the same time. "I'm not offering you charity," Yuki finally said. "I want to be clear about that. This isn't pity or guilt or some misguided attempt to honor Elena's memory. This is business. I understand. Do you? Because the position I'm describing would require you to travel, to speak publicly, to step back into a world you deliberately left behind. I know. Sophie would have to adjust. Your entire life would change. I know that too." Yuki leaned forward. "Then tell me honestly, David Miller, are you ready?" He looked at his daughter sleeping peacefully on a billionaire's sofa, holding a locket that connected her to a legacy she was only beginning to understand. "No," he said. Yuki's eyebrows rose. "I'm not ready. I'm terrified. I've spent 6 years building a life that was small and safe and predictable, and everything you're describing would blow that apart." He paused. "But I wasn't ready to raise a daughter alone either. I wasn't ready to leave academia. I wasn't ready to become invisible." He met her eyes. "Readiness is overrated. What matters is showing up anyway." Yuki smiled. It was the first real smile he'd seen from her, unguarded and warm. Elena would have said something exactly like that. "Where do you think I learned it?" The next morning, David woke to find Sophie already dressed and making breakfast. This was not normal. Sophie was many things: brilliant, stubborn, occasionally wise beyond her years, but she was not a morning person. Getting her out of bed for school usually required 3 alarms, 2 bribes, and at least 1 threat to confiscate her tablet. "What's happening?" David asked cautiously. "I made eggs." She gestured at the stove. "They're a little burned, but I scraped off the black parts." "Sophie, it's 6 in the morning." "I know. I couldn't sleep." She turned to face him, and he saw the worry in her eyes. "Dad, what's going to happen now?" He sat down at the kitchen table. "Come here." She came climbing into the chair beside him, still small enough to fold herself up like origami. "A lot is going to happen now," David said honestly. "Some of it will be good. Some of it will be hard. Some of it I can't predict." "Are we going to be okay?" "Yes." "How do you know?" "Because we've been through worse. Because we have each other. Because—" He stopped searching for the right words. "Because your mom taught us both how to be brave, even when we're scared." Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dad, I want to ask you something and I want you to tell me the truth." "Okay. Do you like her, Ms. Nakamura?" David blinked. "Like her how?" Like her. The way Tommy's dad likes Tommy's stepmom." "Sophie, I just met her 2 days ago." "I know. But you look at her different. Like you're not just seeing her. Like you're listening to her even when she's not talking. David didn't know whether to laugh or cry. His 10-year-old daughter had just described something he hadn't fully admitted to himself. "I think," he said carefully, "that Ms. Nakamura is a remarkable person. I think she understands things about grief and loneliness that most people don't. And I think—" He paused. "I think your mom would have wanted me to find people like that. People who remind me what connection feels like." Sophie considered this. "So, it's okay if you like her. Is it okay with you?" "I don't know yet." She picked at a thread on her sleeve. "I don't want to forget Mommy." "You won't." "How do you know?" David reached over and touched the locket hanging around her neck. "Because she's right here. And here." He touched her chest above her heart. "And here." He touched her forehead. "She's in every memory you have. Every story we tell. Every time you do something kind or brave or stubborn, that's her too." Sophie's eyes filled. "I miss her." "I know. I miss her too." "Does it ever stop hurting?" "No, but it changes. It stops being sharp and starts being soft. Like a bruise that never fully heals but doesn't hurt to touch anymore." Sophie leaned against him. "That's sad." "It is. But it's also beautiful. Because it means we loved someone enough that losing them left a mark." They sat together in the early morning light, eating slightly burned eggs, and not talking about anything important, and somehow talking about everything that mattered. The hotel called at 9. David almost didn't answer. He'd been screening calls all morning, letting the media requests go to voicemail, ignoring texts from numbers he didn't recognize. But the caller ID showed the Royal Grand Hotel's main line, so he picked up. "Mr. Miller." The voice was unfamiliar, female, crisp and professional. "This is Margaret Chen, Interim General Manager. I'm calling to inform you that your administrative leave has been rescinded." David's hand tightened on the phone. "Rescinded. Effective immediately. You are welcome to return to your position whenever you're ready." "What happened to Victoria Hayes?" A pause. "Ms. Hayes is no longer with the organization. I'm not at liberty to discuss personnel matters beyond that." "I see." "Mr. Miller, I also want to extend a personal apology on behalf of the entire management team. What happened in our lobby was inexcusable. The way you were treated afterward was worse. We failed to live up to the standards this hotel is supposed to represent." David didn't respond immediately. He was thinking about 6 years of invisibility. 6 years of being looked through, talked over, dismissed. "I appreciate that," he finally said. "Does that mean you'll be returning?" "I don't know yet." Another pause. "I understand. Please take whatever time you need. Your position will be held." After he hung up, Sophie looked at him expectantly. "What did they say?" "They want me to come back." "As a janitor." "As a janitor." Sophie frowned. "But Ms. Nakamura offered you something better." "She offered me something different. Different isn't automatically better." "Dad?" Sophie gave him the look, the one that said she saw through his deflections. "You can't go back to mopping floors. Not after everything." "Why not?" "Because you remembered. You remembered that you're more than that." She crossed her arms. "And if you go back, you might forget again." David stared at his daughter. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just don't listen." Despite everything, he laughed. The meeting with Yuki was scheduled for noon. David arrived at her office, a sleek space in Midtown that somehow managed to feel warm despite all the glass and chrome, wearing the only blazer he still owned. It was slightly too tight in the shoulders now. 7 years of mopping had changed his body in ways he hadn't fully noticed. Yuki was waiting in a conference room, papers spread across the table. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me." They sat across from each other. The formality felt strange after the intimacy of the previous days. "I've drafted a proposal," Yuki said, sliding a folder across the table. Director of Cultural Communication. You'd work directly with my executive team developing training programs, advising on cross-cultural initiatives representing the company in international contexts. David opened the folder. The salary figure made him blink. This is very generous. This is fair. You have expertise that's rare. You've lived experiences that can't be taught in business school. She paused. And frankly, after that press conference, your public profile has value. Companies are already reaching out asking if you're available for consulting. I'm not interested in being a brand. I know. That's why I want to hire you before someone else turns you into one. David closed the folder. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why me? Really, you could hire 100 consultants with better credentials, more recent experience, no baggage. Why a janitor from a hotel lobby? Yuki didn't answer immediately. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. When I was 19, she said, I sat in a classroom in the Lower East Side, unable to understand a single word anyone was saying. I was alone. I was terrified. I was certain I'd made a terrible mistake coming to America. She turned to face him. And then a woman walked in. She didn't speak Japanese. She didn't have any special training in working with immigrants. She just looked at me and smiled and said, Welcome. We're glad you're here. Her voice cracked just slightly. That was the first time since arriving that anyone had been glad I was there. Not impressed by me, not intimidated by me, not trying to use me. Just glad. She walked back to the table and sat down. Yesterday in that lobby, you did the same thing. You didn't bow to impress me or to make a point or to create a viral moment. You bowed because you saw someone who needed to be seen. David swallowed. Elena taught me that. I know. That's why I want you. Not because of your credentials or your profile or your potential brand value. Because you carry something of her with you, something I've been looking for since I lost her. The weight of her words settled over him like a blanket. I need to think about this, David said. Of course. Not because I don't want it, because I have a daughter who's been through hell, and any decision I make affects her. I understand completely. Yuki hesitated. May I make a suggestion? Please. Bring her here. Not for a tour or a meeting, just to be here. Let her see where you might work, what you might do. Let her ask questions. Let her tell you how she feels. You want Sophie to weigh in on a business decision. I want Sophie to weigh in on a life decision. Those are different things. David considered this. You're good at this. At what? Saying things that sound simple but aren't. Yuki smiled. I learned from my father, and from Elena. David picked up the folder and stood. I'll bring her tomorrow, if that's acceptable. More than acceptable. He was halfway to the door when Yuki spoke again. David. He turned. Whatever you decide, I want you to know something. She looked at him with those sharp, seeing eyes. You already matter. You mattered when you were mopping floors. You mattered when no one knew your name. The job I'm offering won't make you more valuable. It will just make your value visible. He didn't have words for that, so he just nodded and walked out. Sophie was quiet during the car ride home. David glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was staring out the window, watching the city stream past her face, unreadable. Penny for your thoughts. That's not enough money. My thoughts are worth at least $1. Inflation hits everyone. She almost smiled. Dad, can I ask you something weird? Always. Do you think Mommy sent Ms. Nakamura to us? David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What do you mean? Like, what are the chances that Mommy taught her 23 years ago? That she kept the locket all this time? That she came to your hotel on the exact day you decided to stop being invisible? Sophie's voice was thoughtful, not upset. It feels like more than coincidence. Do you believe in that kind of thing? I don't know. I didn't used to. She paused. But ever since we met Ms. Nakamura, I feel like Mommy is closer, like she's watching." David didn't know what to say. He wasn't a religious man. Elena had been the spiritual one, lighting candles and saying prayers and believing in forces beyond the visible world. But he couldn't deny what Sophie was describing. The connections were too precise, the timing too perfect. "I think," he said slowly, "that your mom loved you more than anything in the world. And I think that kind of love doesn't just disappear, it finds ways to keep reaching us. Even after death, especially after death, because death takes away the body, but it can't take away the love. The love stays. The love finds new paths." Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think Mommy would like Ms. Nakamura." "I think so too. And I think she'd want you to take the job." David glanced at her again. "You do?" "Yeah, because you've been sad for a long time, Dad. You try to hide it, but I can tell. And since we met Ms. Nakamura, you seem less sad." She shrugged. "That's what Mommy would want, for you to be less sad." The simplicity of it broke something open in David's chest. "When did you get so wise?" he asked again, his voice rough. "I told you. I've always been wise. You just don't listen." That night, David sat alone in the kitchen after Sophie went to bed. The folder from Yuki lay open on the table. The offer letter, the job description, the salary that would change everything about their modest, careful life. He should have been excited. He should have been relieved. Instead, he felt terrified. For 6 years, he'd built a life designed to minimize risk. Small apartment, steady job, no surprises, no ambitions that could be crushed. He'd wrapped himself in invisibility like armor, protecting himself from a world that had already taken so much. And now someone was asking him to step back into the light. His phone buzzed. A text from Yuki. "I know you're probably awake overthinking everything. It's okay. Whatever you decide, I'll understand. But I wanted you to know something Elena told me once. She said, fear is just excitement holding its breath. Learn to exhale, and fear becomes courage." I've never forgotten that. I hope it helps. David read the message 3 times. Then he got up, walked to the closet, and pulled out a box he hadn't opened in years. Inside were Elena's things, her journals, her photographs, the cherry blossom earrings Yuki had mentioned, her wedding ring which he'd removed from her finger in the hospital and never been able to look at since. At the bottom of the box was a letter, sealed envelope, his name in Elena's handwriting. He'd found it in her nightstand after she died. The hospice nurse had said Elena wrote it during a lucid moment, insisting it not be opened for at least 5 years. David had never opened it. 7 years later, he finally did. My darling David, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry. I wanted more time. I wanted to watch Sophie grow up. I wanted to grow old with you. But wanting isn't always getting. That's something I learned in all those years of teaching. Sometimes the people who want the most have to settle for less. I'm writing this because I know you. I know how you grieve. I know you'll disappear into yourself, pull away from the world, make yourself small, so the pain has less surface area to cling to. Please don't. Please don't become invisible just because I can't see you anymore. You have so much to offer. Your kindness, your patience, your ability to see people when they feel unseen. These are gifts, David. Gifts that the world needs. I know you'll take care of Sophie. I have no doubt about that. But please, please, please take care of yourself too. Let yourself be loved again. Let yourself matter again. I will always be with you. In Sophie's laugh. In the way morning light comes through our kitchen window. In every moment of connection you find with another human being. Don't be afraid to live fully. That's how you honor me. Not by shrinking, but by expanding. All my love forever and always, Elena. P.S. Fear is just excitement holding its breath. Learn to exhale. David read the letter until the words blurred. Then he pressed it to his chest and let himself cry for the first time in 7 years. The tears came like a flood. All the grief he'd held back, all the fear he'd swallowed, all the loneliness he'd pretended didn't exist. He cried for Elena, for the years they'd lost, for the Sophie who would never fully know her mother. And he cried for himself, for the man who'd disappeared into a gray uniform because living fully felt too dangerous. When the tears finally stopped, something had shifted. He picked up his phone and typed a response to Yuki. "I'm in. Let's talk tomorrow about next steps." Then he added, "Elena wrote me a letter before she died. I just read it for the first time. It ended with the same words you just sent me. Fear is just excitement holding its breath. I think she's been guiding us both for longer than we knew." The response came almost immediately. "I think so too. Good night, David. Sleep well." For the first time in years, he did. The first day felt like drowning in slow motion. David stood in the conference room of Nakamura Technologies, facing 12 executives who looked at him like he was an equation they couldn't solve. Yuki had introduced him with warmth and confidence, explained his role, outlined the vision. Then she'd left him alone with them. "So," said a man in his 50s with silver hair and skeptical eyes, "you're the janitor." "I was a janitor," David said. "Before that I was a professor. Before that I was a student. We're all multiple things. And now you're going to teach us about communication. I'm going to try." The silver-haired man leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Miller, I've been in business for 30 years. I've closed deals on 6 continents. I've negotiated with governments. What exactly do you think you can teach me?" David considered the question. He could have been defensive. Could have listed his credentials, his publications, his years of academic expertise. But something told him that wasn't what this moment needed. "May I ask your name?" "Richard Chen, Senior Vice President of International Operations." "Mr. Chen, when was the last time someone surprised you?" Richard frowned. "Excuse me. When was the last time you walked into a room absolutely certain about something and then discovered you were wrong?" Silence. "Because that's what I'm here to teach," David continued. "Not techniques or strategies or frameworks. Those you can get from any consultant. I'm here to teach surprise, the ability to be wrong, the willingness to admit that maybe, just maybe, the way you've always done things isn't the only way that works." Richard stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly he smiled. "All right, Mr. Miller, you have my attention." The weeks blurred together. David threw himself into the work with an intensity that surprised even him. He developed training modules, conducted workshops, met with teams across the company. He learned names and faces and stories. He listened more than he spoke, observed more than he intervened. And slowly, something began to shift. Executives who'd dismissed him at first started seeking him out. They brought him problems that weren't in his job description. Conflicts with international partners, misunderstandings that had festered for years, communication breakdowns that no one else had been able to solve. "How do you do it?" one of them asked after David had helped resolve a particularly thorny dispute with a Japanese supplier. "How do you always know what to say?" "I don't," David admitted. "I just know how to listen for what's not being said." Sophie adapted faster than he expected. The new apartment was bigger. The new school was better. The new life was fuller in ways David hadn't anticipated. But she had questions, lots of them. "Dad, why does Ms. Nakamura work so much?" "Because she has a lot of responsibilities." "But doesn't she get tired?" "I think she does, but she also loves what she does." "Do you love what you do now?" David paused over the pasta he was making for dinner. "You know what I think I'm starting to." Sophie considered this. "That's good. You seem happier." "Do I?" "Yeah. You used to look at people like you were watching them through a window. Now you look at them like you're in the same room." David set down the wooden spoon and turned to face her. "When did you become a philosopher?" "I've always been a philosopher. You just didn't notice." He laughed. "Fair enough. Dad, yes. Is Ms. Nakamura going to be your girlfriend? The question hit him like a splash of cold water. Not because it was inappropriate, but because he'd been avoiding asking it himself. I don't know, Sophie. We work together. It's complicated. Grown-ups always say things are complicated when they don't want to answer. That's probably true. Tommy's dad said dating after his mom left was weird because he kept comparing everyone to her. Do you do that with Ms. Nakamura? Compare her to Mommy? David sat down at the kitchen table, abandoning the pasta. This conversation was more important. No, he said honestly. I don't compare them. Your mom was sunshine. Warm and bright and impossible to ignore. Yuki is different. She's more like moonlight. Quieter, softer, but just as beautiful. Sophie nodded slowly. That's a good answer. Is it? Yeah. It means you see her for who she is, not who you want her to be. She picked up her fork and twirled it thoughtfully. I think that's what Mommy would have wanted. David's throat tightened. You think so? I know so. Mommy always said love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone whose imperfections you could live with. Where did you hear that? She wrote it in her journal, the one she left for me. Sophie's eyes met his. You're not the only one who got a letter, Dad. He stared at her. Elena left you a journal. Grandma gave it to me last year. She said I was finally old enough. Sophie shrugged. It's got all kinds of stuff in it. Stories about when Mommy was little. Advice about growing up. Things she wanted me to know. Why didn't you tell me? Because it was private, between me and her. Sophie paused. But I can share some of it, if you want. Only if you want to. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she recited from memory. My darling Sophie, if you're reading this, I'm not there to watch you grow up. But I want you to know something. Your father is the kindest man I've ever met. He doesn't always see it in himself, but I see it every day. Please remind him. Please help him remember that kindness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing there is. David couldn't speak. She wrote a lot about you, Sophie continued. About how you met. About your first date. About the day you proposed. She smiled. Did you really throw up after she said yes? David laughed despite the tears forming in his eyes. I was nervous. She said it was adorable. Your mother had a generous definition of adorable. Sophie reached across the table and took his hand. She also wrote that she hoped you'd find love again. That she didn't want you to be alone forever. That whoever you chose, she'd already given her blessing. The words hung in the air between them. Sophie? I'm not saying you have to marry Ms. Nakamura or anything. I'm just saying, it's okay, if you want to. Mommy said so. David squeezed her hand. When did you become the parent in this relationship? Someone had to be. You're kind of a mess. I am not a mess. Dad, you wore mismatched socks to your first board meeting. That was a fashion choice. That was a disaster. But she was smiling. I love you, Dad, even when you're a mess. I love you too, Sophie, more than anything. 3 months into the job, Yuki invited him to Japan. The company is opening a new facility in Kyoto, she explained over dinner in her office. I'd like you to be there, to help with the cultural integration. Kyoto. David set down his chopsticks. That's where I studied. I know. That's partly why I'm asking. She met his eyes. But there's another reason. Which is, I want to show you where I'm from, where my father lived, where I learned to be silent. She paused. I want you to understand me, not just the version I show the world. David felt the weight of what she was offering. This wasn't a business trip. This was an invitation into her inner life. What about Sophie? Bring her. I think she'd love Japan. And I think... Yuki hesitated. I think I'd like her to meet my mother. Your mother is still alive. She lives in a small town outside Kyoto. She's 83 and still tends her garden every morning. She doesn't speak much English, but she speaks the language of grandmothers everywhere. Food and unsolicited advice. Yuki smiled. Exactly. David thought about it. A week in Japan with Sophie and Yuki. Meeting her mother. Seeing the places that shaped her. It felt significant. Like crossing a threshold. I'll ask Sophie, he said. But I think she'll say yes. I hope so. Sophie said yes before he finished the sentence. The flight was long, but Sophie handled it with characteristic stoicism. She watched movies, did homework, and interrogated David about Japanese customs. Do I have to bow to everyone? It's polite, but no one will be offended if you don't. What about chopsticks? I'm not very good at chopsticks. They'll have forks if you need them. What about the toilet situation? Tommy said Japanese toilets have like 50 buttons. That's actually accurate. We'll figure it out together. Yuki met them at the airport, looking more relaxed than David had ever seen her. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. Welcome to Japan, she said. Sophie bowed deeply. Konnichiwa Nakamura-san. Yuki's face lit up with surprise. You've been practicing. Dad taught me some phrases. He's not as rusty as he thinks. I never said I was rusty, David protested. You said it 6 times on the plane. I was being humble. You were being neurotic. Yuki laughed a real laugh, full and unguarded. I like her. Most people do, David said. She's annoyingly likable. I'm standing right here, Sophie pointed out. I know. That's why I said it. Kyoto was everything David remembered and nothing like he expected. The city had changed in the decades since he'd lived there, but the bones were the same. The ancient temple still stood alongside modern convenience stores. The rhythm of life still moved between hurried and contemplative. Yuki showed them her world piece by piece. The elementary school she'd attended, where a photo of her as a gap-toothed 7-year-old still hung in the hallway. The tea shop where her father used to take her every Sunday. The university where she'd first dreamed of building something bigger than herself. This is where my father is buried, she said on the 3rd day, leading them to a quiet cemetery on a hillside overlooking the city. Sophie held David's hand as they approached the grave marker. It was simple, unadorned. Just a name and 2 dates. Hiroshi Nakamura. Sophie read slowly. 1932 to 2004. He died 20 years ago, Yuki said quietly. Some days it feels like yesterday. Some days it feels like another lifetime. She knelt and lit incense, murmuring words David couldn't quite hear. Sophie watched with serious eyes. Then, without being asked, she knelt beside Yuki and bowed her head. David stood back, feeling like an intruder on something sacred. After a moment, Yuki rose. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. I used to come here every week when I lived in Japan. I'd tell him about my work, my failures, my fears. He was a good listener even in death. What would he think of you now? David asked. I think he'd be proud. But I also think he'd tell me I work too much and need to learn how to rest. He sounds wise. He was, in that quiet way that some people have, the kind of wisdom that doesn't need to announce itself. Sophie looked up at her. That's what my dad is like. Yuki smiled. Yes, I've noticed. Meeting Yuki's mother was not what David expected. Keiko Nakamura was small and fierce, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. She lived in a traditional house that had been in the family for 4 generations, with a garden that could have been photographed for magazines. She greeted them at the door with a bow and a rapid stream of Japanese that David struggled to follow. She says you're too thin, Yuki translated. Both of you. She's going to fix that. I'm not too thin, Sophie protested. Don't argue with Japanese grandmothers. You'll lose. Keiko led them inside, talking the entire time. David caught fragments questions about their journey, comments about the weather, observations about how tall Sophie was for an American child. Then she turned to David and spoke directly to him, her eyes sharp. She wants to know if your intentions toward her daughter are honorable. Yuki said, her cheeks flushing slightly. David bowed. Hi Nakamura-san. Watashi no ito wa kanzeni meiyo na mono desu. Keiko's eyebrows rose. She responded with another stream of Japanese, faster this time. She says your accent is good, but your grammar is terrible. She also says anyone who bothers to learn Japanese for her daughter might be worth keeping around. I learned it 20 years ago for academic reasons. She doesn't care why you learned it, she cares that you did. Keiko gestured for them to sit, then disappeared into the kitchen. The sounds of cooking began immediately. Sophie leaned toward David. I think she likes you. What makes you say that? She didn't poison the tea. That's a low bar. Take what you can get, Dad. Dinner lasted 3 hours. Keiko served dish after dish, each one a small masterpiece. She watched them eat with the intensity of a general observing a battle, nodding approvingly when they asked for seconds. Somewhere around the 5th course, she asked Yuki a question that made her daughter go still. What did she say? David asked. Yuki hesitated. She asked if I'm happy. What did you tell her? Yuki looked at him. At Sophie. At the table full of food and the room full of warmth. I told her I'm learning to be. Keiko nodded, satisfied. Then she turned to David and spoke again. She says happiness is a practice, not a destination. She says her husband taught her that. Your father? Yes. He used to say that happiness is like a garden. You have to tend it every day, even when it's raining. Especially when it's raining. Sophie perked up. That's like something my mom wrote. What did she write? She said love isn't about perfect moments. It's about showing up for the imperfect ones. Keiko said something else. Yuki translated. She says your mother was very wise for a young woman. She was the wisest person I knew, Sophie said. Keiko reached across the table and took Sophie's hand. She spoke softly, and Yuki's voice was thick when she translated. She says that wisdom doesn't die. It passes from one heart to another. Your mother's wisdom lives in you now. Sophie's eyes filled. Thank you, Nakamura Oba-san. Keiko smiled, the first full smile David had seen from her, and squeezed Sophie's hand. Later, after Sophie had fallen asleep in the guest room, David and Yuki sat in the garden under stars that seemed impossibly close. Your mother is remarkable, David said. She's terrifying. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Yuki laughed softly. No, I suppose they're not. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The sounds of night surrounded them. Crickets, distant traffic, the whisper of wind through bamboo. David. Yes. I need to tell you something. Yuki turned to face him. I've been afraid to say it because I don't know how you'll react. His heart rate increased. Okay. These past few months, working with you, getting to know Sophie, bringing you here, it's meant more to me than I know how to express. She paused. I've built my entire life around achievement, milestones, quantifiable success, but none of it ever made me feel the way I feel when we're just talking, being together, existing in the same space. David didn't speak. He was afraid that if he did, he'd say something wrong. I know it's complicated, Yuki continued. I'm technically your employer. You're still carrying grief for Elena. Sophie's well-being has to come first. There are 100 reasons why this is a bad idea. But I don't want to spend another 20 years wishing I'd said something. She met his eyes. I care about you, David. More than professionally. More than I've cared about anyone in a very long time. The words hung between them like something fragile and precious. Yuki. David reached for her hand. I read Elena's letter. The night I accepted this job. She wrote that she wanted me to find love again, that she'd given her blessing to whoever I chose. And And Sophie told me that Elena left her a journal with the same message, that it's okay to move forward, that kindness isn't weakness, and love isn't betrayal. Yuki's hand trembled slightly in his. "I've spent 7 years being invisible," David said, "hiding from the world because living fully felt too dangerous. And then I walked into a hotel lobby and met a woman who reminded me what it felt like to be seen." He squeezed her hand. "I care about you too, Yuki. I have since the first cup of tea. I just didn't know how to say it without feeling like I was betraying everything I'd lost. And now I understand that moving forward isn't betrayal. It's honoring what Elena taught me, about connection, about vulnerability, about showing up even when you're scared." Yuki's eyes glistened. "So what do? We take it slow. We're honest with Sophie every step of the way. We don't rush or force anything." "That sounds reasonable." "I'm a reasonable person." "You're a janitor who speaks Japanese and teaches billionaires about communication. You're the least reasonable person I've ever met." David laughed. "Fair point." They sat together under the stars, hands intertwined, saying nothing, and meaning everything. And somewhere in that silence, David felt something he hadn't felt in 7 years. Hope. The flight home was different. Sophie sat between them, chattering about everything she'd seen. The temples, the food, Keiko's garden, the fact that Japanese vending machines sold hot coffee in cans. "Can we come back?" she asked. "For real. Like every year." "We'll see," David said. "That's parent code for probably not. That's parent code for I don't want to make promises I can't keep." "Same thing." Yuki leaned across Sophie. "I go to Japan at least twice a year for business. If your father agrees, you're welcome to join me whenever you'd like." Sophie's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Really. My mother specifically requested that I bring you back. She said you're the only one who appreciated her cooking properly." "I ate 4 bowls of rice." She noticed. "She approves." Sophie looked at David. "Dad, please, 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 please. We'll talk about it." "That's better than we'll see." "You're learning." Halfway through the flight, Sophie fell asleep with her head on David's shoulder. In the dim cabin light, he watched her breathe slow and peaceful, completely at ease. "She trusts you," Yuki said quietly. "She's my daughter." "That's not what I mean. She trusts you to get this right, to not mess it up, to be the father she needs while also being the person you need to be." David looked at Yuki. "I'm terrified of disappointing her." "That's how you know you won't." "That doesn't make sense." Parents who are terrified of failing usually don't. It's the ones who think they have everything figured out that cause the damage. David smiled faintly, speaking from experience. "My father was terrified every day of his life. Terrified of being a bad husband, a bad father, a bad provider. He died thinking he'd failed at all of it." Yuki paused. "But I never felt failed. I only ever felt loved." "That's beautiful." "That's the truth. And I think Sophie feels the same way about you." David looked at his sleeping daughter, at the woman sitting across from her, at the impossible life that had somehow become his reality. "I don't know how any of this happened," he said. "Does it matter?" "I suppose not." "Then stop questioning it and start living it." He nodded slowly. "Okay. Okay. Okay." Yuki smiled and leaned back in her seat, and somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, 30,000 feet above a world that had seemed so small just a few months ago, David Miller finally let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he deserved to be happy again. 1 year changed everything. David stood at the window of his new office watching the city wake up below. The sun was just beginning to paint the skyline gold, and the streets were filling with people rushing toward their days. He used to be one of them, invisible, anonymous, moving through the world without leaving a mark. That felt like another lifetime. His phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. Don't forget parent-teacher conference at 3. Mrs. Patterson says I'm exceptionally verbal now, whatever that means. David smiled. A year ago, those words would have seemed impossible. Sophie had spent so long in silence, so long struggling to find her voice. Now her teachers complained that she talked too much. He typed back, I'll be there. And exceptionally verbal means you're becoming your mother. The response came immediately. Good. She was awesome. Yes, David thought, she was. The conference room filled slowly. David had learned to read these meetings like text, the body language, the seating arrangements, the subtle hierarchies that governed corporate behavior. Richard Chen sat at the head of the table now, a position he'd earned over months of collaboration. The skepticism was gone from his eyes, replaced by something closer to respect. Before we begin, Richard said, I want to acknowledge something. When David joined us, I thought it was a publicity stunt. A feel-good story to distract from real business concerns. He paused. I was wrong. The room shifted. Executives who'd been checking phones looked up. In the past year, our international partnerships have increased by 40%. Our employee satisfaction scores are at an all-time high, and we've resolved conflicts that had been festering for years, decades in some cases. Richard turned to David. I don't know how you do what you do, but I'm glad you're here. David nodded. Thank you, Richard. But I can't take credit for any of that. All I did was create space for people to listen to each other. The actual work, the hard conversations, the uncomfortable truths, that was all of you. Still, Richard said, we wouldn't have known how to start without you. After the meeting, Yuki found him in the hallway. That was quite an endorsement, she said. Richard's come a long way. So have you. She fell into step beside him. Remember your first day, you looked like you were waiting for someone to realize they'd made a mistake. I was waiting for that. And now? David considered the question. Now I'm just trying not to mess it up. That's called being human. It's called being terrified. Yuki laughed. Same thing. They walked together toward the elevator, maintaining the professional distance they'd agreed upon at work. It wasn't easy. Over the past year, their relationship had deepened in ways neither had anticipated. But they'd made a commitment to Sophie to take things slow, to be intentional, to never let their personal lives compromise her stability. Dinner tonight, Yuki asked as the elevator doors opened. Can't. Parent-teacher conference. Ah, yes, the exceptionally verbal situation. She texted you too. She texts me everything. I'm apparently her go-to person for advice on how to handle boys. David stopped. Boys? What boys? Yuki smiled. Relax. She's 11. It's still theoretical. It better stay theoretical until she's 30. Good luck with that. The elevator closed between them, and David found himself alone with his thoughts. Boys. His little girl was thinking about boys. Time moved too fast. Yesterday she was 3, standing at the window waiting for Elena to come home. Today she was 11, navigating a world that got more complicated by the minute, and somehow he had to guide her through it. The parent-teacher conference was not what David expected. Mrs. Patterson, a veteran educator with 30 years of experience and a reputation for bluntness, met him in her classroom with an expression he couldn't quite read. Mr. Miller, please sit. He sat. I've been teaching for 3 decades, she began. I've seen every kind of student. The gifted ones, the struggling ones, the ones who slip through the cracks despite everyone's best efforts. She paused. Your daughter is something else entirely. Is that good or bad? It's remarkable. Mrs. Patterson leaned forward. When Sophie came to this school 2 years ago, she barely spoke. The previous district had flagged her for speech therapy potential developmental delays. Her file was full of concerns. David's jaw tightened. He remembered those meetings. The the specialists who talked about Sophie like she wasn't in the room, the labels they tried to attach to her. "And now," he asked, "now she's the most articulate student I've ever taught. But it's not just about words, it's about how she uses them." Mrs. Patterson pulled out a folder. "I wanted to show you something." She handed him a paper, an essay handwritten in Sophie's careful script. The title read, "What Silence Taught Me." David began to read. "When I was little, I stopped talking. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I had too much. The words got stuck inside me like cars in a traffic jam, and after a while, I just stopped trying. Everyone thought something was wrong with me. Doctors said I had a condition with a long name I can't spell. Teachers talked about me in whispers. Kids at school called me weird. But my dad never treated me like I was broken. He never pushed me to talk or made me feel bad about being quiet. He just sat with me, read to me, let me be exactly who I was. And then, about a year ago, something changed. My dad met a woman named Yuki. She's very smart and very successful, but the most important thing about her is that she understands silence. She knows that quiet people aren't always hiding. Sometimes they're just listening more than they're speaking. Yuki told me that my mom taught her the most important sentence she ever learned. Your voice matters even when it's quiet. That sentence changed my life. I realized that silence isn't the opposite of speaking. It's just a different kind of voice. And when I was ready, my words came back. Not all at once, but slowly, like flowers growing after a long winter. I still like being quiet sometimes. I still listen more than I talk. But now I know that when I do speak, people will hear me. Because my voice matters. Even when it's quiet. David set down the paper. His hands were trembling. "She wrote this for an assignment about personal growth," Mrs. Patterson said. When she read it to the class, 3 students started crying, including me. I didn't know she felt that way. Children don't always tell us what they're carrying, but they show us if we're paying attention. David stared at the essay, at his daughter's words, at the evidence of a healing he'd witnessed but never fully understood. "She's going to be okay," Mrs. Patterson said. "More than okay. She's going to be extraordinary." "She already is." "Yes, she is." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Whatever you're doing, Mr. Miller, keep doing it." That night, David found Sophie in her room, surrounded by books and half-finished art projects. "Can I come in?" She looked up. "Sure." He sat on the edge of her bed, the essay still in his hand. "Mrs. Patterson showed me what you wrote." Sophie's eyes widened. "She wasn't supposed to do that." "I'm glad she did." David held out the paper. "This is beautiful, Sophie, and I had no idea you felt this way." Sophie shrugged, but there was a vulnerability in her expression she couldn't quite hide. "It's just how I see things." "It's how you see things, with incredible clarity and compassion." He paused. "The part about me sitting with you, about not pushing you to talk, I never knew if I was doing the right thing." "You were." "How do you know?" "Because I'm here." Sophie's voice was steady. "I'm talking. I'm okay. If you'd done something different, maybe I wouldn't be." David felt tears building behind his eyes. "I was so scared, Sophie. Every single day I was terrified I was failing you." "You weren't. You were just loving me." She moved closer and leaned against his shoulder. "That's what parents are supposed to do, right? Love their kids even when they don't know how to fix things." "I suppose so." "Then you did good, Dad. You did really good." They sat together in the quiet, father and daughter, carrying a love that didn't need words to be understood. The wedding invitation arrived 3 months later. Not from David and Yuki, they weren't there yet, still taking things slow, still prioritizing Sophie's adjustment. The invitation was from Marcus, the night concierge who'd been David's friend throughout the darkest years at the hotel. "He's marrying that woman from accounting," Sophie announced, examining the envelope. The one who always brought him cookies. How do you know about the cookies? Marcus tells me things. We still text sometimes. David smiled. The connections Sophie had built never ceased to amaze him. She collected people the way other children collected toys, with genuine interest and careful attention. We should go, David said. He was there for me when no one else was. Duh, we're definitely going. Sophie looked at the invitation again. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. When are you and Yuki going to get married? The question caught him off guard. We haven't talked about that. You should. Talk about it, I mean. Sophie set down the invitation. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I decided I'm okay with it. If you want to marry her. Sophie, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. That's why it matters that I'm saying it. She looked at him with those serious two-old eyes. Yuki makes you happy. She makes me happy too. And I think Mom would have liked her. You do? Yeah, they're different, obviously. Mom was like sunshine, you said. Yuki is more like moonlight. But they both make the world brighter. She paused. And I think Mom would have wanted someone to take care of you after she was gone. She worried about that, you know. How do you know? Her journal. She wrote about it a lot. How she was scared of leaving you alone. How she hoped you'd find someone who understood you. Sophie's voice softened. Yuki understands you, Dad. Maybe better than anyone except me. David didn't know what to say. His 11-year-old daughter had just given him blessing, really, to move forward with his life. Thank you, Sophie. For what? For being so wise. For loving me even when I'm a mess. For making this whole journey bearable. That's what daughters are for, Dad. Keeping dads from falling apart. When did you become so grown up? I've always been grown up. You just didn't notice. He laughed, a real laugh, full and free. Fair enough. The proposal happened on a Tuesday. Not a special Tuesday. Not an anniversary or a holiday or a carefully orchestrated moment. Just an ordinary Tuesday evening with Sophie at a friend's house and David cooking dinner in Yuki's apartment. Can you pass the salt? Yuki handed it to him. Marry me. She froze. What? David turned off the stove and faced her. I've been carrying the ring around for 3 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. The sunset on a rooftop, a fancy dinner, a meaningful location. He shook his head. But that's not us. We're not grand gestures and dramatic moments. We're tea in quiet rooms and conversations that don't need words. Yuki stared at him. David, I know we said slow. I know we said intentional. And I'm not trying to rush anything. But I realized something yesterday when I was sitting in traffic thinking about absolutely nothing important. What did you realize? That I want to spend the rest of my life sitting in traffic with you, making dinner with you, having boring Tuesday evenings with you. He pulled out the ring, simple, elegant, not ostentatious. I don't need perfect. I just need you. Yuki's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. I'm not easy to live with. Neither am I. I work too much. I forget to eat. I wake up at 3 in the morning with ideas I have to write down immediately. I know. And I still have days when I can't speak, when the silence takes over and I can't find my way out. I know that too. David took her hand. Yuki, I've seen every version of you. The billionaire CEO and the scared 19-year-old who couldn't speak English. The woman who conquers boardrooms and the woman who cries in her mother's garden. I love all of them. A tear escaped despite her best efforts. Sophie gave us her blessing. 3 months ago, she's been waiting for me to stop being a coward. Yuki laughed through her tears. She told you that. She tells me everything. Apparently I'm the last to know most things. You are. It's very annoying. So I've been told. David held up the ring again. What do you say? Want to make boring Tuesday evenings a permanent arrangement? Yuki looked at the ring. At David. At the half-cooked dinner and the ordinary kitchen and the extraordinary, ordinary life they'd somehow built together. Yes. Yes. Yes, David Miller, I'll marry you. She took the ring and slid it onto her finger. On one condition. Name it. Sophie gets to help plan the wedding. She's been sending me Pinterest boards for 6 months. David pulled her into his arms. Deal. The wedding was small. 30 people in a garden with paper lanterns strung through the trees, and Sophie as the maid of honor. Keiko flew in from Japan bringing gifts and unsolicited opinions about everything from the flower arrangements to the cake selection. She approved of none of it, which David had learned was her way of showing love. Marcus came with his new wife, both of them beaming. Richard Chen came, which surprised everyone. Victoria Hayes was not invited, though David had heard she'd landed a job at a smaller hotel chain in Florida. The vows were simple. I promise to listen, David said, holding Yuki's hands. Not just to your words, but to your silences. To understand that sometimes the most important things can't be spoken, only felt. I promise to stay, Yuki replied. Through the boring Tuesdays and the difficult conversations, and the moments when neither of us knows what comes next. I promise to be present, even when being present is hard. Sophie watched from the front row, clutching her rabbit, still even at 11, with tears streaming down her face. You may now kiss the bride. David kissed his wife. The applause was warm and genuine, but what David heard most was Sophie's voice cutting through the noise with characteristic directness. Finally. The reception lasted until midnight. David danced with Yuki, then with Sophie, then with Keiko, who turned out to be an excellent dancer despite her protests. He ate too much cake. He laughed at Marcus's terrible toast. He felt for the first time in longer than he could remember completely and utterly happy. As the evening wound down, Sophie found him standing alone near the edge of the garden. Dad? Hey, sweetheart. Can I show you something? She led him to a quiet corner away from the remaining guests and the fairy lights. In her hand was the silver locket, both halves now connected as they were always meant to be. I want you to have this. David frowned. Sophie, that's yours. Your mother gave it to you. She gave me one half. Yuki had the other half. And now you have both of us. Sophie pressed the locket into his hand. I think that's what Mom wanted all along. For you to find someone who could complete the circle. David's throat tightened. I can't take this. You're not taking it. You're keeping it safe. For all of us. Sophie looked up at him with those wise, impossible eyes. Families aren't made of blood, Dad. They're made of choices. Mom chose you. Yuki chose you. I chose you. She smiled. And now we're all connected. The locket should be with you because you're the one who holds us together. David clutched the locket, feeling the weight of everything it represented. Elena's love, Yuki's journey, Sophie's resilience, his own transformation from invisible to indispensable. When did you get so wise? He asked, his voice rough. I've always been wise, Dad. Sophie hugged him tight. You just finally started listening. 1 year later, David stood at a podium in front of 300 people. The conference was Yuki's idea, a gathering of business leaders, educators, and communication experts to discuss the power of authentic connection in an increasingly disconnected world. David had resisted at first. Public speaking still made him nervous. The spotlight still felt foreign, but Sophie had pushed him. You have things to say that people need to hear, she'd argued. That's what voices are for. So here he was. 2 years ago, David began. I was a janitor. I mopped floors and cleaned toilets and disappeared into the background of a 5-star hotel. I was invisible by choice, because being seen felt too dangerous after losing the person who saw me most clearly. The room was silent. And then one morning, a woman walked into the lobby and refused to speak English. Not because she couldn't, she was fluent in 4 languages, but because she wanted to see who would try to understand her without demanding she perform on their terms. He found Yuki in the audience. She was smiling. I stepped forward that day. I bowed. I spoke Japanese. And in that simple act, everything changed. He paused. Not because I did something heroic. Not because I had special skills or secret knowledge. But because I treated another human being like a human being. I saw her. I listened. I showed up. He looked out at the faces before him, some skeptical, some moved, all attentive. The world is full of noise. Everyone's talking, but nobody's listening. We've forgotten that communication isn't about volume, it's about connection. It's about creating space for someone else to be heard. He thought of Elena, who'd taught him this truth, of Sophie, who'd lived it, of Yuki, who'd reminded him. My daughter wrote something once that I'll never forget. She said, "Silence isn't the opposite of speaking. It's just a different kind of voice." I think she's right. I think the people who understand silence, who can sit in it, be comfortable with it, learn from it, those are the people who truly know how to communicate. He took a breath. I'm not here to tell you that my story is special. I'm here to tell you that it's not. Every single one of you has the capacity to see someone who feels invisible, to listen to someone who's been talked over, to step forward when everyone else steps back. He found Sophie in the front row, sitting next to Yuki, holding her hand. Dignity doesn't need a title, David said. Kindness doesn't need permission. And love, real love, the kind that changes everything, it doesn't need perfect conditions. It just needs you to show up. He smiled. So show up. Listen. Be present. And remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't speak, it's create space for someone else to be heard. The applause started slowly, then built into something that filled the room. But David barely heard it. He was looking at his daughter and his wife, at the life he'd built from the ashes of the one he'd lost, at the evidence that healing was possible if you were brave enough to reach for it. After the conference, the three of them walked through the city as evening settled over the streets. That was a good speech, Dad, Sophie said. You think so? Yeah, you only said like 12 times. That's improvement. Major improvement. Yuki slipped her hand into his. She's right. You were wonderful. I was terrified. Those aren't mutually exclusive. David laughed. You said that to me once before, on my first day at the company. It's still true. Fear and courage are the same thing, just wearing different clothes. They walked in comfortable silence for a while. The city hummed around them, traffic and conversations, and the eternal rhythm of urban life. But within that noise, they'd carved out something quiet, something real. Dad, Sophie asked. Yeah. Do you ever miss being invisible? David considered the question. He thought about the gray uniform and the mop and the years of keeping his head down. He thought about the safety of anonymity, the protection of going unnoticed. Sometimes, he admitted, it was easier, less scary. But then I remember what it cost me, the connections I didn't make, the words I didn't speak, the life I wasn't living. He squeezed Yuki's hand. Being visible is harder, but it's also fuller. Sophie nodded. That's what Mom said in her journal. She said you spent too much time trying to disappear, and she hoped someday you'd remember how to take up space. David felt the familiar ache that came with mentions of Elena. But it was different now, softer, warmer. Less like a wound, and more like a reminder. She knew me better than I knew myself. That's what love does, Yuki said quietly. It sees us clearly, even when we're hiding. They stopped at a park bench, watching the last light fade from the sky. Sophie sat between them, small enough still to fit perfectly, but growing every day into someone who would eventually need her own space, her own life, her own journey. I love you guys, she said suddenly. We love you too, sweetheart. I know, I just wanted to say it out loud, because sometimes the most important things don't get said enough. David pulled her close. You're right, they don't. So let's say them more. All the important things. Even when it's awkward or embarrassing or whatever. Deal. Deal, Yuki echoed. They sat together as the stars emerged, three people who'd found each other through grief and silence, and the courage to speak when speaking was hardest. The locket hung around David's neck. Now both halves joined a reminder of everything they'd lost and everything they'd gained. Elena was there too somehow. In Sophie's laugh, in the evening light, in the space between words where love lived. "Dad," Sophie murmured, half asleep against his shoulder. "Yeah. I think we're going to be okay." David looked at his daughter, at his wife, at the life he never expected to have. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said. "I think we are." And they were. Not perfect, not without struggle or fear or the occasional boring Tuesday that felt endless. But okay. Really, truly okay. Because they'd learned the secret that mattered most, that dignity isn't given by others, it's carried within. That silence can be strength. That love doesn't end with death, it just finds new ways to bloom. And that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simplest act of all, showing up and being seen.